All right, subscribers, so it doesn't matter if you're thinking about doing an LS swap or you're halfway into it. This is definitely a video that you guys should watch. It should be one of the first videos you guys watch, because this is going to go over a lot of the electronics, a lot of the wiring in the LS swap and in your vehicle. So understanding this will make it a whole lot easier when you start doing your LS swap. All right, guys, let's get started. So it doesn't matter if you have a Ford or a Chevy or a car or truck. This is going to apply to pretty much every single vehicle that gets LS swapped. So we're going to assume that the vehicle we're starting off with, everything works fine. The engine works fine and the transmission shifts normal and the car starts with keys. So for this video, we're going to focus on the electrical stuff, since that's what confuses a lot of people and that's where a lot of mistakes are made. So first, we're going to start off with an old school engine that's carbureted, and since most older transmissions are not electronic, we're going to ignore that for now. Next, we're going to need a battery to provide 12-volt power when the engine is not running and when the alternator is not working. That battery is going to power the starter. The starter is going to turn the engine until we're able to squirt fuel and air into the engine and provide some spark to get it running. You will use an ignition switch to control the power going to the starter solenoid, which then activates the starter motor. Under the dash, you'll have a fuse box that looks something like this that gets main power from the battery and provides power to your ignition switch. Okay, so that was a lot to cover, but this is basically everything that you're going to focus on whenever you do your LS swap. So this is before you do your LS swap. This is what you should have right now. So let's start off with the battery and work our way around. So from the battery, on the negative side, you're going to have like a 4-gauge wire going to your engine block. So that's going to provide ground for your starter and everything else on your engine block. The battery must also be grounded to your chassis and to your body of your vehicle, but these wires are usually a little bit smaller. So now on the positive side of your battery, you're going to have a huge wire, probably the biggest one yet. That's going to be a 4-gauge wire, just like your ground one that went to your engine. This one's going to go to the starter motor, and it's going to go to this big plug right here. Do not confuse this stud with this stud. This one right here, the big one, this is the one that gets direct power from the battery via a huge fat cable. And this one will power the starter motor. This is what powers the motor that turns over your engine. The smaller post up top, that one gets power from your key. And what that does is allow the power to go from this post here over through the inside of the solenoid to this post here, and that's what powers your starter motor. Okay, so we had that big fat 4-gauge wire going from the battery positive to the starter motor. When you turn your key on, it will give power to your engine, and when you turn it all the way over to crank, it'll give power to your starter solenoid, which will allow power from the battery go to the starter motor. On some vehicles, the wire coming from your ignition switch might go through a neutral safety switch and then go to your starter. The ignition switch will get power from a fuse box inside your vehicle. The fuse box will get constant 12-volt battery power. Sometimes it gets it directly from the battery itself, and sometimes they take a shortcut and run the wire to the big fat cable on the starter, giving the fuse box power. Okay, so now that everybody's thoroughly confused, let's go ahead and break it down into 3 different systems. This way it makes sense to everybody. The 3 systems we're going to focus on is the vehicle's electrical system, the key on circuit, and the starter circuit. So let's start off with the vehicle electrical system. This basically consists of the vehicle chassis harness and the fuse box and how it's connected to the battery. So most fuse boxes will have like 10 or 12 gauge wires, and they might be connected directly to the positive side of the battery. In some cases, it might go to the fat lug on your starter, and it gets power from the battery through the lug on your starter. Some fuse boxes may have 2 or 3 power wires that are getting power from the same location or maybe different locations, but it doesn't matter. You want to make sure when you start doing your LS swap, before you pull the engine out, you want to identify the 3 wires. Maybe it's just 2 or 1, but you want to identify the wires that power up your fuse box and make sure you hook those back up to power after you do your LS swap. Don't forget, this fuse box is going to power up your lights, your ignition switch, and a bunch of other stuff. So wherever it gets power from, you need to make sure you put power back to it after you do your LS swap. So now let's go over your key on circuit. So we're assuming we're doing our LS swap and we hooked up all the power wires back to power for our fuse box, so our fuse box has power now. So our fuse box is now going to provide 12 volts constant power to our ignition switch. When we turn our ignition switch on, there should be a wire that has 12 volts on, and it keeps 12 volts even when we crank. That power should be hooked up to our distributor. You want to make sure you mark that wire and save it, because we're going to use that wire to power up our LS swap harness and computer system. Some of the other stuff the ignition switch will power that is not affected by the LS swap will be things like your stereo, your gauges, your sensors, things like that are not going to be affected. So you just leave them hooked up. And the third and final system that I want to cover is the starter system. Now, the starter system and the key-on system, the only thing they have in common is that they're powered by the fuse box and controlled by the ignition switch. But other than that, they have nothing in common. The only thing the starter circuit does is provide 12 volts when you turn the key all the way to start position. It provides 12 volts to your starter solenoid. The starter circuit has nothing to do with your LS swap or your LS swap harness. If your starter was working fine before the LS swap and you grab all the wires from the fat post and move all those wires to your fat post of your LS starter, and you grab all the wires from the small post, it should just be one, and you move that over to your new LS starter, your starter will start. On some vehicles, you'll still have your fuse box powering your ignition switch, but your ignition switch, the starter circuit, it might go through a neutral safety switch, or it might go through a starter relay, or it might go through both. But as long as you provide power back to your fuse box and you don't remove any of those items, and the only thing you're doing is the LS swap, your starter's gonna work. So out of the 3 different circuits that we covered, the only one that needs to be wired into your LS swap is the key-on power. Your vehicle electrical system should remain the same as long as you continue to provide it power. And your starter circuit should remain the same as long as you just transfer those wires over. So whenever you're doing your LS swap, it doesn't matter if you're using the OEM computer, a BP harness, Terminator X, or Phytech, you're always going to have to provide a good 12-volt constant power source, a good ground, and then you're going to use your key-on power that gives you key-on and cranking power, and you're going to provide all those inputs to the harness that you're incorporating in from your Terminator X, your Phytech, or your BP Automotive, and that should be all you need to do electrically. And again, to emphasize one more time, your starting circuit has nothing to do with your LS swap. It has nothing to do with your Terminator X or with your BP Automotive harness or any of that. And also your charging circuit has nothing to do with that either. So hopefully this makes sense. If you're a subscriber, ask questions, let me know. If you are not a subscriber and somehow you're watching this, feel free to subscribe to my Instagram. That is where I'll personally help you fix your LS swap and answer all your questions.